Yeah. So we're actually on now.
Well, hello there. Welcome back for episode 2 of Meet Us at the Corner Conversations. We are so glad that you joined us today. We saved you a seat.
By the way, where do they have seats at the corner? We're meeting at the corner.
Yeah,
you said a seat.
Or is this a
bench,
semicircle, really?
at a bus stop.
A bus stop.
There you go.
A
Okay.
bus stop.
Okay, now that we figured that out, I think we can get going. So today's conversation is going off of the last couple of podcast episodes for At the Intersection with Doug Newton, right here, Doug Newton. And episode 4 was covering the topic of false impressions and kind of the cons, destructive patterns of false impressions. And then episode 5 was about the pros of being a people pleaser, which was a little bit of a surprise. Are there pros to being a people pleaser? So we just wanted to talk and unravel those topics a little bit more today, talk about current culture, and maybe some things that we can do in order to live with more character within those cultural frames. So let's start with episode 4's topic of false impressions. Dad, I don't know if there's anything that you want to say just to kind of summarize where you were going with that. And then I had some questions that came to mind when I watched it in terms of just some discussion points.
You know, the thing that kind of drove it, other than character in itself, because all of this stuff is about character, but, it is a concern that I think many people have, not just myself, but how our image-focused world, the power of images, back in the, I don't know if it was the 1960s or 70s, there was, I can't even remember the guy's name because it was just something that popped into my head right now, but he said that anything that's on camera is immediately false. I'll come up with his name, but and he was the one who just questioned, whether or not you could ever have authenticity when there was a camera showing. And of course, they talk about reality shows,
Right.
But we have to remind ourselves all the time that there are cameras around these people that are supposedly being normal, right? And it's basically impossible. And so that power of image, visual images, and particularly that has filled the culture, filled the airwaves, filled our minds for now really about 60, 70 years, the power of image has a destructive effect on so many people, particularly young people, because they get an impression of how things should be, can be, and it becomes a standard of what they've got to measure up to in order to be able to accept themselves, that or to be able to find peace, or to wind up drawing them into behaviors, habits, and allures into dead ends and things like that. It has been measurably very destructive in many people's lives, and it doesn't end with once you get out of the teen years or something like that, or even preteen years. It doesn't end then. Some people come out of it and they kind of learn how to adjust and not be driven or drawn by the power of images, but a lot of people don't, and it can carry over throughout a person's whole life. So that's what I was dealing with in that podcast, just the power, the allure of an image-based world, and trying to help people see that we can't be part of that.
Yeah.
Not in terms of how it affects us, but as people of character, and particularly Christians, we have to make sure that we are not adding to that image-oriented world by ourselves not being, really who we are, but we're trying to put on airs.
Yeah. Well, because I think, like what you're saying, our culture has almost become okay with giving false impressions. We've just chalked it up to, that's just photoshopped, or that's just touched up, or we're touched up in different ways, and we're just like, that's, everybody does it, so let's just jump on the train and do it with everybody else. So I think one of the things, though, that came to mind when you were talking about this false impression society that we're in, there is that side of the balance, but then I do think there has been somewhat of a new trend, probably an answer to that of, well, I just want to be fully who I am, embrace all of me where I'm at. Don't make me be anything different than who I am, what I wear, what I weigh, whatever it might be. And I kind of think that can be destructive as well. So that was my question today is, when could trying to be almost too authentic to ourselves keep us from being our best selves? Like, is there ever anything good to us trying to not impress people, but try to tighten up how we live or look a different way, or
Yeah, I don't know whether or not that there's a target. In other words, so what is our target when it comes to whatever control we have over who we are?
Yeah.
Because we all are participants in the shaping of who we are. We make decisions and we present ourselves, and we have a certain amount of control over that. And so I think that if your target is to try to be authentic in order to impress people, you're actually still doing exactly the same thing.
Yeah, that's true, because that usually is the reason.
You're actually trying to present an image. You're trying to create a false image of being this authentic person. So it's almost like C.S. Lewis said that humility is not trying to lower yourself, or it's just not thinking about yourself at all.
Yeah.
It's just being who you are in that sense. But if a person is trying to be authentic, then they're actually thinking about themselves a lot. They're actually putting a lot of attention on themselves. They're actually trying to shape who they are. And so, to your point, I think if the target is, well, I am going to try to not be exactly who I am right now, because I'm wanting to be a better person. So, and I have to work at that. I'm actually going to try to shape that kind of me by making decisions that aren't exactly who I am right now. I don't feel like to blend the two podcasts together. I don't feel like shaving right now. If you didn't see that one about shaving, you'll see that I'm a pretty petty person about.
Check out episode 5 of season 2.
But I think if you see things about yourself as you are, and you realize that's still not the kind of person that I want to be, then that kind of work, that kind of effort to kind of be something other than you are, is the right thing to do.
Right.
Because you're actually voluntarily and intentionally and for good reasons wanting to become that person. So it's not like kind of a false thing. It's you're going toward the true self that you've got in mind. That, and of course, from a Christian point of view, we want to say that perception of who we ought to be and who we want to be is not something that's self-determined, but it's actually having that absolute standard of Jesus and Christ-likeness and good character. Yeah. Does that make sense? I mean, it's like you can want to be something that you're not if you're going towards something that you should be. But if you're being something, if you're going for something that you're not in order to gain acceptance, approval, measure up to some standard, in order for you to feel good about yourself, in that sense.
So what I hear you saying is it depends on whose standards we are looking at as the standard, right? So if we're looking at, and you mentioned this on the podcast, at the Kardashians' influence of image or the Photoshop magazine images, if that's our standard and that's what we're trying to go to and live up to, that's incorrect. However, if there are mentors or examples around us in our life, you even mentioned Jamie Lee Curtis. Should she be an example to us in every way? No, but should she be an example to us in the way that she didn't allow her airbrush self to be all over media anymore? Yes, she should be an example. So I think it is looking for those people that we want to emulate, but then of course the biggest standard is God's perception of who we are and can be and need to be, and that's what we should be going toward. Mom, do you have any
Well, the
thoughts?
thing I was thinking about is when we think of young people, I think really that parents have a huge responsibility to monitor what the kids are saturating their minds with.
Yeah.
Because the more we're exposed to something, an image, or a way of reacting to things or whatever, you start to identify with those very things that you're saturating your mind with. And so I really think that as adults and as young people, we just need to make sure that what we're watching, what we're taking in, what we're valuing, we're just trying to come to a place where we admire the right things, that we want to emulate the right things, so that because it's so easy to get. I mean, I remember being a young person, and you look at the fashion magazines and you look at all of those things that influence young people as far as how you're looking, because it's a big deal coming to be able to accept yourself as you're growing older and your body starts to change, and just go, what do I want to look like? How do I want to present myself? And you can just get so many different influences. And so what is influencing me, and what is my what do I want to project, whether it be physically or whether it be reactionary, and even particularly, which is not being taught very much, is how do I process things and how do I relate to people. And I think all of that is wrapped up in who we want to be authentically. And of course we want to be like Jesus, but I mean, when Doug put on the thing about Jamie Lee Curtis,
who you kind of look like, by the way. I've always told you that.
I've gotten that. But I just admired her for doing that, because she was really standing against the trend. And so I think that's part of it. Are we willing to look at what we are admiring and saying, is that really something we should be admiring and trying to emulate?
Go ahead. No.
Well, something that came to mind as I was thinking about all of this was that different cultures admire different things. It's interesting that we think that the images in America are like the standard, right? I mean, and I also think over the years those things change. So good luck keeping up with what you're supposed to be, because back when you all were growing up, you had what was the stick model or whatever. Twiggy, yeah. Oh, that's Twiggy stick. I get it. Yeah. Anyway, and then now it's like more curvy, and people are getting all kinds of implants for curvy. And I mean, the same thing. I love home trends, but home trends are constantly changing. Yeah. So I think
I just want to say that I have not needed any help on the curvy side of things.
Oh, congratulations!
I'm doing fine there. It's got,
Depends where the curves are, Dad. That's what we're.
I know. That's what I'm saying. That's right.
But I just think of trends, and that's probably where the word comes from, right? It's a trend for a while, but then it disappears. So if you're trying to keep up with the current trends, good luck. But also, that's too bad, right? I mean, I love trends. I love fashion. I love design. I love all of that. But I think at this age, in my 40s, I've kind of settled into, let's be the best version of who I am and make the best of what I have, right? Same thing with my home. I tell clients all the time, don't fight your home. Don't try to make your home something it's not. Just look at what your home is and then make it the best version of that home. And I just think that's where we need to kind of settle in, is yes, we can work at what we look like, what we act like, who we are, and we continue to improve ourselves. I think that's life. We should be continuing to improve ourselves. But I think when it becomes that false impression is when we're trying to be something we were never intended to be.
Well, I think that gets at kind of still where, I mean, I totally get what you're saying, and have sometimes used that kind of language, but it also is very trendy today to use the phrase "the best version of yourself."
Yeah.
And the trendy use of that word of that phrase leans really strongly in the direction of something that's self-determined. I get in my own head the version of myself that I want to have, and so I'm still kind of the one in charge, and it leaves out from a Christian standpoint. I think we are always pursuing God's best version of ourselves, which means there's going to be there's an external standard,
Yes,
not an internal one. And so the trend today, even in the whole area of authenticity, is still a kind of a self-determined, independent, subjective view of what a good version is, what is right and what is wrong. And a minute ago, you used the word incorrect about the Kardashians, that it turns out that that's incorrect. I would actually say that it's helpful in our culture, while we understand words like correct, incorrect, true, and false, and so on and so forth. I think one of the things that, and as Christians, we readily understand and accept absolute standards versus relative standards, and that we want to be pursuing, those absolute standards, which are embodied in the person of Jesus as kind of the standard of righteous human and love and all that sort of stuff. But I think that when it comes to relating to our culture, probably the best kind of way to interface language-wise with our culture is even taking the idea of a best version of yourself and talking about superficial versus not necessarily even authentic, although that could be a good word. But I think, when you were talking about the Kardashians, I was thinking, well, the reason not to go there, and I don't even know anything about the Kardashians, so
I used to watch their show. I am repenting right now.
Well, again, I don't know about them and what they were trying to accomplish, but the whole image stuff to me is, let's not even worry about correct or incorrect. Let's just pose to people. So, do you want to be shallow? Do you want to be superficial? Do you want to be rich and deep and genuine in that sense? And I think that helps, because we do live in a culture where, before you're even out of the gate in a conversation, you're talking with people who are saying, "Well, that's true for you," or "That's right for you," or "That's," So approach them on their own grounds. Do you really feel like the deepest, richest kind of life is just to follow a lot of those trendy, superficial kinds of images, or find something that is more lasting, more permanent, richer?
Yeah. No, that's good. And I'm going to shift to another question, but before I do always like to bring it back to like what we have actually experienced. So, have either of you had experiences in your life where you have noticed you need to shift away from creating some kind of false impression that you've accidentally done or maybe intentionally done along the way?
Several spring to mind, but I've already been doing some talking. Margie, I will share one, but I'll give Margie first crack at it.
Well, I think one of the very first things for me was, and this is not, anyhow, I'll just go ahead and say it. When I was in high school, I prided myself in being able to do makeup well. And so I wore makeup all the time, and I looked at the trends and all of that. And then I met your dad, and he asked me why I wore makeup. And I was just, okay, the reason I wear makeup...
Not because I thought it was wrong.
But...
It was a philosophical question?
Not even philosophical.
Really,
I went, what's the point? You be you.
Yeah. But actually, that was a freeing thing for me. And I'm not saying that women shouldn't wear...
Well, your daughter
makeup.
Wears makeup.
Yes. But I'm not saying anything against that. But it was a good transition point for me to be able to be comfortable looking in the mirror without makeup. And and I really had to surrender it to the Lord, because it was a kind of not only a pride thing, but an insecurity thing in my life. And so when I was faced with that, I stopped wearing makeup. And there have been several times that I've gone, especially as I'm getting older, I pinch my cheek. It's best. But I've been convicted about, and again, this is not to say that women should not wear makeup. It's just, I get convicted about that. And it's something the Lord has used in my life to just say, are you going to rely on that? Or are you just going to relax, be who I made you, and put yourself forward as you are? And so that's basically where I've come to. And like I said, there's sometimes I look in the mirror and I go, a little makeup could help here.
So that's part of the reason why I wanted to do the morning me thing.
Yeah.
Because I think, so I put this picture of me as I look when I get up in the morning, just immediately right out of bed. Mm-hmm. The issue was, could I do it? Was I willing to be seen that way? And I think just having that kind of personal sort of decision as a kind of a test case of, okay, could I do that? Could I just not care enough about people never seeing me that way to be able to do it? But then I'm not going to keep doing it. That's the authentic me. But I'm not going to.
That's not going to be all your pictures.
I'm not going to go out in public like that. Yeah. I'm not going to. I'm going to.
On behalf of our family, thank you.
So, I just think it was. I think it's an interesting test case for a person just to go, could I do it? Could I just do it?
Right.
And it was neat to see somebody who did do it.
Mm-hmm. I was willing to. I forgot.
Oh, well, it was, I really wish you would.
God.
So here's my quickie. For me, the image when I was in high school was motorcycle man. Mm-hmm. And most of the guys that I was into sports, but I was also into motorcycles. And it was in, the late 60s, early 70s, hippie time, long hair, denim, everything, and then there was a motorcycle image. So I was really wanting to. That was the image I wanted. Even a certain brand of jeans and cowboy boots, and leather and all that sort of stuff. And so, in my junior year of high school, I got my motorcycle license, and I was in a small town named Chittenango, New York. And I had one of those kind of motorcycles where you could do wheelies and all that sort of stuff, and so I was so cool. And I intentionally went downtown where there would be people.
Yeah, I remember this.
Girls.
Where there were girls.
It's always about the opposite gender.
And I was outside of a drugstore on the motorcycle just waiting for the right time. And this is really shallow. So maybe my problem is not your problem. But
it's confessional.
Yeah. But there was a couple high school girls a ways off, and they're walking in this direction, So I'm going, okay, big chance. Now this is the time to pull away from the curb, do a wheelie down the street. And they were getting closer and closer. So I had my helmet off and had my gloves off, because you had to take the stuff off in order to put it back on, so that you could put the things on in just kind of the cool way, everything. But it does no good to have, that opportunity to pull away from the curb and do a wheelie if your helmet's already on, because they won't know who it is.
Oh, yeah.
So you got to keep the helmet off. Yeah. And you see, I told you, I am. The authentic me is relatively shallow. So I waited for that, and then I had to call attention to myself. And all the time, you're not even thinking, I'm trying to call attention to me.
Right.
That's the power of, that's the insidious kind of nature of it.
Yeah.
And where people don't even know they're doing it a lot of times.
That's really true.
and they're getting closer and closer and closer. So I have to, wind out the engine a little bit to kind of make it noisy so that they would look and everything, but wait to the last minute to put my helmet on. Last minute, I quickly put my helmet on and I put it on backwards. I just whipped it on and it was backwards with the face mask down here and like there. And
so much for cool.
So much for cool. And what do you do at that point? You can't spin it around. That doesn't work that way. So I just kind of, rather than doing a wheelie away, I just kind of slunk away down the street.
I think we've all had those kind of moments.
Yeah,
I mean, right? You got the girl. Eventually you got
But
the
it
girl.
was right then. I mean, literally right then. And I know a lot of our listeners and viewers may not be followers of Jesus. But it was right then. I mean, it's so strong. It wasn't like an audible voice. But a strength of an inner voice said, that's who you are. That's who you are. And it was from that moment that I wanted to be a different person.
Yeah.
So from that moment, I had another image in mind. So again, going after an image is not the wrong thing.
It's which image you're going
It's
after.
what image you're going after.
Right. And whose image you're going
Right.
after.
And whether you're crafting it on your own or whether you're listening to this world of absolute truth and wonderful standards, which I believe, again, Christianity isn't sole library of everything that's right and true and good. It all comes from God. But I find that the quickest access for that connection with the real and the true and the good is through a relationship with God, through Jesus. Yeah.
So here's the next question that came to mind, again, as I was listening to the podcast, episode 4. Because I do think a lot of our desires to go towards false impressions, subconsciously or whatever, are often determined by the people around us, the voices that we hear, even people close to us who accidentally or maybe strategically are telling us how we need to present ourselves.
Right.
And so, and that's been part of my life, honestly. And some of those images that we're following, those people, whether they know it or not, are telling us what we should be looking like.
Right.
I think for females, we often feel that pressure of guys' eyes, and especially maintaining youth and all of that youth entails,
Right.
So I think there's voices and eyes around us that we feel like we need to be answering or living up to. So as part of not only us speaking to ourselves correctly and following correct images and voices, what can we do for other people in order to help them to not give false impressions, to give them the freedom to be who they are, and be real around us by being who? What do you think we can do for other people?
Well, I think you can just be real yourself and
Not wear makeup.
and
I
I'm not going to live that one down. But that's where the Lord really worked in my life, was that pride of how I did it. So anyhow, I just think, I know that sometimes two things. First, I think you can affirm people, which is just a huge thing. Just liking people for who they are and affirming them in the things that you do sense are genuine about who they are and that are wonderful. Another thing that I've found is to break down barriers myself. And so sometimes I feel like I have a responsibility not to dress a certain way that looks super sharp when I'm going into a situation where I know other people are going to be challenged to be able to reach a certain dress standard, and I'll just go, okay, well, I'm just gonna sort of go down a notch from where I might choose to go as far as dressing, in order to make it a little bit more of a even playing field. And I just think being conscious, or Dad used the word the other day on the podcast, being considerate of other people, just thinking about what can make them feel comfortable? How can you make them feel good about themselves and to build their self-assurance of who they are rather than thinking about me? Just try going, okay, Lord, help me to think about other people before I think about how I'm coming off. And so I try. I don't live that successfully all the time, but that's what I try to do, and especially because Dad and I have been in so many public kind of situations, is trying, and we've been in leadership, and leadership itself creates an image, right. and so to be able to just relate to people, especially going out of your way to relate those who aren't in leadership, because it's so easy to get into that leadership clique that's very comfortable. You're talking about the same concerns and all of that, rather than relating to people who aren't in that same kind of circle of leadership and just caring about them. And so,
I think off of what you're saying, I have a couple thoughts. First being considerate of people's perceptions of you, or how you might be a distraction.
Right, yeah.
I have to think about this a lot as I'm leading worship on a stage. The angles people are looking at me, who's going to be looking at me. I mean, even though I really want to wear a tube top and mini skirt.
Oh, yeah, right.
But I consider what I'm wearing on stage, because I do not want to be a distraction.
Right,
it is not about me up there.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what you're saying just about in life in general.
Right,
Like,
right.
how can we not be a distraction to people? Now, there are cults that take this overboard, and different religious sects. In fact, I would say a freedom point for me was, and we have landed different places. I get some highlights and do some makeup. But the Lord, I feel like, has worked that freedom into my life, because there was a time where I felt like, am I going overboard with vanity? I like fashion. I like design. I like hairstyles. Is that wrong as a Christian? And I was actually prayed for one time, and the person praying for me, not knowing me at all, said, the Lord loves that you love beauty. And in that moment, I was like, He loves who I am. I was created to appreciate this kind of stuff. And so that was a freedom point for me. Now you can take that too far.
No, but that's wonderful.
But so anyways, you can land different places and it still be correct, you know. So yes, but I do think being considerate of other people. I often want to talk to girls and say, be considerate of the guys that you are around. Like, what are you trying to be, and who are you trying to attract? Because you're gonna be attracting all the wrong ones. Whether you're putting a helmet on backwards or wearing a tube top, whatever it might be. But the other thing, again, back to what you were saying, Mom, just being encouraging of other people, I think, gives them freedom. I would go beyond be encouraging for what we see. I have started to, at this point in my life, ask for the Lord's lens on people.
That's a very good point.
Because I think that we are limited in seeing the beauty in other people. And we might not think this hairstyle or this way of dressing or this way of behaving is something that's attractive to us. But it might be attractive in another culture, and it's probably attractive to the Lord, because He made them very true to who they are.
That's very true.
And so I think when I'm able to ask the Lord, or just kind of tap into that part of me where it's like, okay, Holy Spirit, is there something about this person that you love that I don't see yet? And those have been the most true beauty moments. And honestly, it turns me in the way that I view that person. It makes me less frustrated with them. It makes me not curl my nose up as much at them or be as judgmental. So I think those are a couple of things that I would say. Is there anything you would say, Dad?
Yeah, well, I think you're probably wanting to take us into
the final question.
The final question.
Yeah.
But I would want to say to folks that as we've been talking about image and false image, we have landed a lot
on physical.
in physical.
Yeah.
But there's other ways in which we're presenting images, faking things, needing to be, and and like the image of the strong person when you're not actually feeling strong. Where you just can't admit, whatever, where it's not just facial or body presence or something like that. It's taking on kind of a personal trait that really isn't as I said in the podcast, and just last Sunday I preached, and in order to make the point that I was making, it really did require me to tear down the false impression my own congregation might have about me, and confess two very specific things that would help them realize, because that's a freeing thing for people. If they look up to you and they see you as a person because of the situations that you're in, and they're seeing you, they're hearing you with where you've landed. You know,
right.
the
Not
things
the
that you've
process
learned,
there.
but they haven't seen the person in formation, right?
Yeah.
And so it does become my responsibility with that kind of image, which has nothing to do with how I look.
Yeah.
But it's their assumptions about how I must always behave or something like that, that they've got a false impression about. So, so I want to make sure people know that the whole image stuff goes
deeper than just looks.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you know, I think the last question is actually about self-image, because that was episode 5, but they really overlap quite a bit, and we've already even talked about it some. But I think the point where I would say we want to land today, and just a guiding last question here is, you know, when you were giving the podcast episode on self-image and the pros of being a people pleaser, and if you haven't heard that episode, please go back and watch it, because it actually is really interesting, because I think a lot of times we just think it's all negative to try to please people. But really, your intent with that podcast was to say it's about people pleasing for the people's sake, not for our sake. So that's kind of the last question here is, in terms of self-image, in terms of people pleasing, I think where you have to land is, who are we trying to please, and why are we trying to please? With our image, with our impressions, with whatever we might be doing. So what would both of you briefly say, what's important about the who or the why? Is there a who? I mean, we've all already talked about God, obviously. But is there another way to tease out who we're using as our markers kind of for pleasing or for casting a certain image or anything?
Well, I tend to default in the kind of realm of marriage.
Yeah.
An awful lot of the time, in terms of understanding, you know, how we're supposed to relate to other people in this whole area of pleasing other people, and in marriage it can get kind of complicated.
Yep.
You know, those dynamics of, you know, especially, it's not always this way, but especially in the power dynamics in a marriage relationship, it does tend very often, but not always, and I don't know what the percentage would be, but it does tend in the direction, I think, that the power dynamics in a marriage is often on the side of the man. And especially if the man is the kind of person who thinks that his wife is supposed to please him. You know, if that's kind of that sense of what marriage is about, because I said on the podcast that the old-fashioned way of looking at marriage was to honor and prefer the other person, to want to please the other person, and make the other person feel loved and all that sort of stuff. And I totally believe that, right? But if the other person is not in partnership with you and seeing it being that kind of exchange of self-sacrifice, it can happen that one person in a marriage doesn't get the whole self-sacrifice idea. They've got a partner who's ready to kind of do whatever it takes to please that person, and the other person's just soaking that up, and that throws everything off. So it really is a complex question, and there's no easy answer on that. But it is one reason why, and it doesn't always guarantee, because you've got a Christian marriage, that it's going to turn out this way. But boy, if you could start in a marriage relationship, or in a sense, ideally in any human relationship, with a mutual decision to submit to one another, like Paul talks about, you know, where there's a kind of a mutual submission where I don't have to worry about my own needs because I know she's going to care about me so much that she'll be mindful of that and even be willing to sacrifice herself in order to help me and so forth. And if I'm doing that for her, it's like it's the perfect way things are supposed to work. But because it's not guaranteed that you're going to get there in marriage or any other relationship, it is dangerous territory when you're just going, well, I'm here to please you. And again, there's no easy answer, and that's why I was saying on the podcast that at least come to the place where you're conscious of what is pleasing to another person, so that you've got the opportunity to even make a decision in that moment. Is this a time, or is this a situation, or is this a person, or is this the right thing right now for me? And the parents deal with this all the time. You know, if all they cared about was pleasing their children, they'd have brats, right?
Right.
So a parent is always having to live in that moment of trying to consider whether this is a time to do what the child wants or not.
Yep.
If we could live in that moment in every relationship we have, be conscious of that in every relationship we have, at least that's a good step towards getting at what I meant about being a people pleaser, where you're at least thinking about that. But then I did take it another step, and I said, the orientation, however, is, even though it's complex, and even though, you know, the first big, huge step is to be considerate, there is still kind of a self-surrender part of living the Christian life, where you have to be like, and I'm, by the way, folks, I realized after I did that podcast that I completely messed up. I was quoting Peter, and I kept saying Paul all the time. Paul said. It was Peter who talked about pleasing or doing what your boss says to do, even if they're harsh and mistreat you. You know, that there is something about true godliness where you are willing to do something even when it's being required of you, you know, which is what Jesus was saying in the Sermon on the Mount. Going the extra mile was in a case where someone is requiring you already to do something that you don't really want to have to do, and in that moment you're going an extra mile. So there is another dimension to it that I think every Christian's got to be willing to not just be considerate, but if it calls for it, if there's some reason it calls for it, for me to lay down my own interest, to say, you know, if I never get what I want, loving this person is still
the right thing to
the
do.
right thing to do.
Right.
That is super hard. It's super complex. It takes the wisdom of the Lord.
Right.
Because you can get trapped in those power dynamics that are really destructive.
For both people.
For both people.
Yeah, I think that's what, you know, I just think it takes a lot of discernment in those kind of situations. I mean, that's where you get into problems when you have alcoholism involved or drugs or that kind of thing. You want to love that other person, but what is the way to truly love them? And that's where the discernment needs to come in. Do you need to take a hard stand against them, which just takes a lot of strength to do that, and also a support system. And I think that's one dynamic that we haven't talked about a whole lot, is the importance of being in a community of people who care about growing in a Christian community, growing in Christ-like character, so that we're encouraging one another in those. And so when those hard situations come up, we have people that we can go to and pray with and consider what is the best way to show love to this person. Because it just, sometimes it's just, I think the way the Lord's created it is seeking the wisdom of other counselors, and
because our minds get messed up.
right, yeah, and
jumbled up.
we get clouded because we care about this person and how do I approach this in the best way, and it's not always the best way for me. What is the best way for them, and for their good? And sometimes it hurts to watch people have to go through what they need to go through that is the best thing for them.
Yeah.
And that.
Yeah, you said a minute ago, do the hard thing against them. And I thought, no, it's not against them.
No, right.
It's the hard thing for them. It just feels to them in those moments like it's against them.
Yeah, good clarification.
Yeah. I had a time where I preached a sermon about this kind of self-sacrificing spirit within not just marriage. Marriage is the best place to practice it, but we're supposed to live this way.
Yeah.
You know, we're supposed to be willing to be last rather than wanting to be first. We're supposed to be willing to lay down our lives in order to save our lives. We're supposed to, have this kind of loving attitude of not seeking for ourselves, even when others aren't doing what we need them to do. That's what the whole golden rule is about. Do to others what you would have them do to you at the very time when they're not doing it to you, and you're still going to say thank you when they're not saying thank you to you. I mean, that's where the rubber meets the road. Okay, so I was preaching a sermon on how this plays out in marriage. Guy came up to me afterwards, and we was shaking hands at the doors. People are walking out. And he just looked me in the eye. He says, "I believe everything you said this morning, and I am not going to do it."
Oh, what a nice guy.
I thought,
Good guy.
it's kind of an interesting juxtaposition of real honesty and authenticity.
Oh yeah, he's being him.
But I'm going. So he wasn't even envisioning for his own marriage.
Yeah.
That kind of a relationship that would require that level of self-sacrifice, and I hope they're still together, but it would probably be a
challenge.
For her, probably not for him. He's probably living the life. So I do think, I think taking all of this information, it does boil down to be careful of who you're trying to please and why you're trying to please them. I think, I think of it personally, but I also think of it organizationally, working for churches and being part of cultures sometimes that are a bit more what you would consider seeker sensitive. And, it often starts out as, well, let's make it so that we're accessible for people. So we're not making it so we're limiting who can be part of our culture and the community that we're creating. However, man, that can go downhill super fast when it goes from being accessible to making people feel comfortable. And God is not comfortable. Like, God requires us to be things that are hard for us sometimes. And God deserves our glory. And we're creating things. I've been reading the Old Testament and the tabernacle. The tabernacle was built for God's presence. So people could sacrifice and draw near to the priests who were then near to him. But the tabernacle, which is, I relate it to today's church, was not created so that people felt good and cozy. It was kind of a place that you esteemed, right? So I just think sometimes even organizationally, we can go off the rails where we have a good intention at first, to be accessible, and then it becomes making people feel comfortable. And then it actually dumbs down who God is. And again, that relates then to our own relationships too, dumbing down who we are to make other people feel comfortable with who we are. And that's not the best for them or us. And that's kind of what you were talking about, Mom. So anyways, careful of the who you're pleasing and the why you're pleasing. But people pleasing people, not...
Be willing to orient your life that way.
So, Anyway, great discussion. Go back. Please listen to those podcasts. It'll probably get your own thoughts going. We know we do not have the end-all and be-all of the thoughts for this. We'd love to hear your thoughts. You can DM us, or you can put it in the comments. You can email doug@fresh-impact.com if you have any thoughts, too. We always love interaction with our viewers and listeners and the people that inspire what we're doing. So We like to wrap up by just sharing favorite things sometimes, things that are current in our lives that we're enjoying that maybe you'll enjoy. Now, I have something today. Do you all have anything that you want to share today that's a favorite thing recently?
I have a very simple thing. Every spring, we live by a little park, and I don't have any pictures to show, but every spring there are geese that have little goslings
Oh my goodness, so
that are
cute.
around, and they are just
Poopy.
so they do. They poop. Yeah, and that's messy. But they are just so beautiful.
Yeah.
Just the life itself and how the Lord's created life to continue. And we have little ducks and just the way that they are hatched and they start to learn how to swim and everything. And it just, and we've just seen the birth of another child for one of our friends today. And just how the Lord's created life, and that just never ceases to amaze me. The complexities of it, the beauty of it, and just the marvel of what He's given us to enjoy in our world. And it just is, it's overwhelming sometimes to me. So, yeah.
So you could go for a walk too and go find your own poopy gosling.
Yeah, that's right.
Do you have anything to add?
Oh, yeah, a quickie. Because some of the work, a lot of the work that I do on character, I'm always working with deadlines and things like that. Recently, I've been working on developing little baseball card size trading cards with 12 different traits on them, and I'm just enjoying trying. And each one has kind of a picture like of a hero of that trait from history or whatever. So, I mean, I've always tended to scan the historical horizon for people with good character, but I just came across one that I put onto a card today that just is really, or not today, but it's coming out, and it's Dr. Jon Snow. And the reason why I wanted he's the kind of the hero of the trait of diligence, and it's like I want to give a shout out to him, because he was an obstetrician.
He's not around anymore.
He's not around.
He's not around.
This is the middle 1800s. He was an obstetrician, but on his own time, he was the first person in human history to discover that things like cholera were transmitted because of germs and bacteria and that kind of stuff. Nobody knew that. And the way that he discovered it was that he went into the dangerous work on his own time, not getting paid, to track every single death that had occurred in the area of London.
Wow.
Mapped it all out, just rigorously tracking everything, mapped it out. And it was the first mapping of an outbreak. In this case, it was cholera. And by doing that, he identified that these diseases were communicable in these ways through, in this case, through drinking water, and he's the father of epidemiology. He's the father of the whole science of tracking epidemics. And then on top of that, on his own time, he's also the one who really discovered and improved anesthesiology, anesthetics, and how far that's come.
And aren't we thankful for those?
And I've got a clue
Aren't we
that
thankful
pretty
for
soon I'm going to have to, and I'm going to be thinking and thanking the Lord for Dr. Snow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is pretty incredible when we are aware of people that have come before us that have made our lives a little better or
Right.
easier,
For
right?
sure.
So speaking of ducklings and goslings, I have a picture of my ducklings and goslings. Here they are.
Yay!
Gianna and Landon. It's nothing that you guys can do with it, except it was just kind of a moment that struck me. We went on a little family trip recently, and just had some time together as we're transitioning to new jobs, and I'm so thankful for this time. But I had this moment of being so proud of our kids. We kind of gave them the option the last night of this vacation. We're going to pay for one thing for you to do that's kind of special. You know, you can do mini golf, you can do, what was the other one? mini golf, go-karts, and then there was this like ropes course, like tree climbing above like 2 or 3 floors up. I mean, it was pretty high up. And they chose this, and it surprised me, honestly, because both of them, anybody raising kids, you know, your kids have little fear blips along the way, right? And some of them sit in fear longer than others, but both of them chose this, and it surprised me because we've definitely dealt with fear for both of them in this area. But as I was watching them do this, and my husband and I were just, you know, on the sidelines taking pictures, I would have done it. I swear, I would have done it, but we only wanted to pay for 2. And I didn't have the right shoes on, speaking of beauty. But they were up there high doing this, and our son was just kind of like ripping around the course, just like really going after it. And I was proud of him, but it was maybe even more proud of Gianna, our daughter, at moments, because I could tell she was scared, and just this look on her face, like biting her lip, and having to make this choice up on the course of like, which direction am I going to go? Am I going to take the course that's a little harder, or the course that's a little easier? I probably would have chosen the easier one. And she did the easy one, but then she came back around and she did the hard one. And I was just so proud of both of them for just kind of like facing their fears and going after it. And, you know, as we are in the midst of doing some of this courage training, discipleship program stuff, everything, it kind of pops in my mind a lot, like when character is being shown. And in this moment, I was just like, our kids are choosing to be courageous. They're doing something that makes them a little bit scared, but kind of excited to do it because they're like, I did that, and now I'm even better at it. And I just think it was a moment in my life where I went, that's what courage is about. It's kind of a process of not necessarily doing the scariest thing, but it's taking steps to doing something that's a little scary and a little incremental step. It's like posting the morning picture of yourself, right? Like, do the little bit of scary things, and then you'll get to a point where you just have more and more courage in your life, and it'll become easier for you. So,
I mean, that's the whole heart of the character development stuff that we do, incremental steps like that. That's neat.
So thanks for joining us today, and we hope you will join us again in June for another Meet Us at the Corner Conversations.